Right.
Yeah.
Added pressure.
No pressure at all. None.
No pressure at all, cool, okay.
Alright, whenever you're ready.
Okay, the resolution before us today is that we, this House, will legalize the production, sales, and consumption of marijuana. We, the affirmative, define marijuana as the dried leaves, flowers, stems, and seeds from the hemp plant Cannabis sativa. Okay. We define sales as the act of exchanging marijuana for money. We define consumption as the act of using marijuana, whether you are smoking or eating it. And we define production of marijuana as any process in which you are making or growing it for sale or personal use. We strongly believe in the legalization of marijuana in the form of production, sales, and consumption based on 4 logical reasons: racism, taxation, medical, and liberty. For starters, the current legislation is racist. Anti-marijuana laws regress towards systemic racism and oppression similar to Jim Crow laws. Systemic racism occurs when the way society is structured systematically to grant some individuals advantages and disadvantages. What that means is that our current anti-marijuana legislation targets minorities disproportionately in the same way that Jim Crow laws did to the South prior to the Civil Rights Movement. This is inherently unjust and therefore contrary to the American ideals. Unjust laws must be repealed. Secondly, taxation. The U.S. government is losing potentially huge amounts of revenue. Currently, the U.S. government is missing out on $2 to $9 billion each year in tax revenue due to restrictions on marijuana. Clearly, taxation is the more beneficial option. Plus, not only are we combating racism, but we are bringing in an economic boost. Let's face it, marijuana is going to be consumed either way, but we're basically ignoring the ability to make it a proper commodity. We cannot continue to fight a losing battle, especially if the economic advantages of legalization are so obvious. Marijuana consumption happens in masses, the demand is high, the consumption is high, and the benefit of legalization and regulation is extremely high. Third, the medical benefits of marijuana outweigh any negatives. Prohibition is against progression. Medical marijuana is defined as a physician-recommended form of medicine or herbal therapy. Cannabis has been used throughout the world medically, recreationally, and spiritually. Doctors in the U.S. support marijuana use overwhelmingly, and some even prescribe it illegally to fight cancer in patients. Basically, marijuana prohibition limits the ability of doctors to battle terminal diseases such as cancer, which continue to plague our country. If anything, the most important reason for legislation is to be able to increase the health of American citizens. Lastly, marijuana prohibition is contrary to the idea of liberty. Liberty is defined by the power to do and choose as we want. Liberty requires that all things which do no harm to others' liberties ought to be legal, and such a phrase as to each his own. The government does have a right to limit those choices if the individual's actions endanger another individual. This does not apply to marijuana, since the individual who chooses to use marijuana does so according to his or her own free will. The government may have a right to limit the individual actions if those actions pose a significant threat to that individual themselves. In short, individuals do deserve the right to decide whether or not they wish to use marijuana. But because the government has been allowed to tell us how to live our lives, it has caused incarceration rates to be driven up to ridiculously high rates. Our liberty is being snuffed out. So as you can see, you should vote for the legalization of marijuana in the form of production, sales, and consumption because it combats racism, boosts the economy, helps the sick, and protects our liberty. That's it. Do we do questions?
Questions?
Okay.
Does she stay there or do we go back to this?
Yeah, you can just stand if you want to go stand next to her. You can.
That's alright.
I'm standing. Just taking the pressure off of me.
Okay. Well, for starters, I would kind of ask for you to elaborate more on the racism part of your debate, or your argument. Like, could you elaborate a little more on it?
Like as far as, okay, so we see that it is similar to the Jim Crow laws. We believe that minorities are targeted, even though if you look statistically, white people smoke, or Caucasian, smoke marijuana just as much, if not more, than minorities, but yet minorities are the first people to be arrested and thrown in jail for it, statistically speaking.
Okay. Your taxation, how exactly, like, is the economy just based on the taxation, like if that's just the only
Like
way?
just how taxes work today, like, you know, they help schools, roads, stuff like that, like we would tax the sale of marijuana just like you would tax alcohol, just like you would tax tobacco. And then that money we would reap the benefits as input into things that we all use.
No, but my question was, like, is it just the only income coming from, like, we legalize it and that's the only income that's gonna happen from?
Well, I mean, I assume small businesses and corporations that would be manufacturing, like pharmaceutical companies would reap the benefits.
Okay. What was the other question I had? Oh, so in a lot of the alcohol and like tobacco, which you kind of related it to, they within a state it might be legal, but it varies by counties or by like cities or something. Is there some way that this could be prevented? Like with the legalization, would it be just overall just the entire state? No counties or cities would have a say in it? Or?
I think it would have to be legal across the board, just like alcohol is, but alcohol is regulated on different states based on like when it can be sold, you know, and when places can stay open and stuff like that. Like I think in New York they can sell alcohol the whole time, you know, during the day, but we can't, we have to stop at 2. I figured it would be the same way.
So it's time.
That's alright. I'm like trying not to get mad at you. I'm like, listen.
Alright.
Okay, so in order to fully understand the controversy at hand, it is important to know the terms that are associated with the controversy being discussed. I will begin by defining consumption, production, and sales by making reference to Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Consumption is defined as the act or process of consuming, for example, the consumption of food, the consumption of resources, or the use by or exposure to a particular group or audience. Production. Production is the act or process of producing, the creation of utility, especially the making of goods available for use. Total output, especially of a commodity or an industry. For sales, we define it as of relating to or used in selling, to give up property to another for something of value such as money or to offer for sale. So, to build the case, there are 3 points that must be brought to our attention. The first point being that it is ironic to attempt to legalize marijuana because of the federal government's current war on drugs. A man by the name of Anders Oppenheimer of the Miami Herald further illustrates this point by stating, "Here's the biggest irony. Tuesday's midterm elections. The U.S. government will continue demanding that Mexico, Colombia, and other countries fight the marijuana trade as part of its war on drugs. Meanwhile, Washington voters have just approved making pot legal in the U.S. Capitol." Point 2. Legalization would put the public in danger. This is because marijuana is more potent than before, and according to the University of New England, today's marijuana is not your Woodstock weed. In the 1960s and 70s, THC levels of the marijuana smoked by baby boomers averaged around 1%, increasing to just under 4% in 1983, and almost tripling in the subsequent 30 years to around 11% in 2011. Point 3. Marijuana usage cannot be equated to crime and or violence. This is because statistics show a decline in violence within states that have legalized marijuana. According to Jack Healy from the New York Times, marijuana supporters note that violent crimes in Denver, where the bulk of Colorado's pot retailers are down so far this year. The number of robberies from January through April fell by 4.8% from the same time in 2011, and assaults were down by 3.7%. Overall, crime in Denver is down by 10%, though it isn't. So this is the next part. What's going on now? Disadvantage theory. What is going on now with the production, sale, and consumption of marijuana? Currently, states such as Colorado, Washington State, Alaska, and Oregon have already declared the usage of marijuana as a legal practice. This is currently not a problem yet, but we are close approaching a situation in which the production, sale, and consumption of marijuana will become an issue if we allow more states to legalize cannabis. Our nation has done well in the past without legalizing marijuana. Why should we start now? So what's the connection? If marijuana was legalized, this is what would happen, to name just a few things. Students' performance at school would become adversely affected. The legalization of marijuana would include the deterioration of society, and it would cause an industry similar to the tobacco and alcohol industries to take form. So, the break. if any more states allowed the legalization of marijuana, we cannot reverse the effects that would take place. Legalizing marijuana would cause minors to be able to access marijuana, addiction in minors would become more prevalent, and the newly created marijuana industry would make it even more difficult to keep marijuana out of the hands of minors. So, in conclusion, the impact that the legalization of marijuana would have on the United States is significant. It is important to remember that it is ironic to attempt to legalize marijuana because of the federal government's current war on drugs. That legalization would put the public in danger, and that marijuana usage cannot be equated to crime and/or violence. The consequences of the legalization of marijuana would include students' performance at school becoming
Time.
adversely affected. Okay. Thank you.
So you can stay up for a question.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Curtis, right?
Yes.
Alright.
Okay, so when you're talking about the war on drugs, my question for you is, wouldn't legalization put an end to the war on drugs?
Yes, but the irony behind that is that in Colombia and Mexico, that's where our war on drugs is taking place, but here in the US, we are legalizing marijuana.
Okay. And if it is so potent, couldn't we just smoke less if they wanted to? Couldn't they make the THC levels lower, and we wouldn't have that problem?
I suppose you could, but I believe that if you're smoking marijuana recreationally, you're smoking marijuana to get high, so you would smoke a sufficient amount to become stoned.
Okay. And when you were talking about crime is down, can you go over that again? What you meant by that?
So crime in areas where marijuana has been legalized has dropped statistically.
And you're saying that when it's legalized, crime is down?
Yes,
Okay. That's all my questions.
thank you.
You still have like a minute.
Do you have any more questions?
That's all we got.
Okay.
I don't know what you said.
I had one, but I couldn't put it.
You want this?
It's your turn, right? Yeah.
Do you want this too?
No, it's
Alright. I'm trying to, where are we?
This is the attack.
Your name?
fine. Oh, I'm Ryan.
Okay, just wanna make sure I've got the right.
So before we start, well, before I make my points, I would just like to clarify about the crime being down. One of our articles says that it cannot be correlated to the sale of marijuana. It has been down, but it cannot be correlated. It says overall crime in Denver is down, but it's impossible to say whether changes in marijuana laws played any role in that decline. We would also like to point out the point that the constructive made about the medical marijuana being helpful for being helpful for those who are needed. Many of those who it might prove helpful, but in one of our articles it says that after the effects of marijuana have already finished, it still remains in the body, which later affects parts of the brain, which in any case, so you're basically helping them with one age, but just making other areas that are perfectly healthy with more you're creating more problems for those areas. It is also, I would also like to call attention to the idea of liberty. Although people do choose to consume and buy marijuana, it is the role of the state and the government to protect the entire entity of the citizens. So to say that some people choose it, there's risks that go along with the consumption and sales. So the goal of the state is to protect the entire state as a whole, if that makes sense. So by not legalizing marijuana, it puts the, I don't want to say this, I'm really bad at this. Okay, basically, yeah. And also marijuana isn't a very addictive drug, so by choosing to, it's kind of ironic to say that you're emphasizing free will when by taking part in marijuana, you're losing your free will to the drug. And and for taxation, a lot of the income is not only coming from taxes, but it's also going to go indirectly to private companies and private stocks, which would not benefit the government in any way or form. So, do I still have time?
You still have a minute.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I would, I guess, clarify the information. Medical marijuana. Where did I say it? Here it is. It says there is the human brain's receptors are typically activated with natural occurring chemicals in the body called endocannabinoids, which are similar to THC. There's a high density of cannabinoid receptors in part of the brain that affect pleasure, memory, and concentration. Some research suggests that these are areas that continue to be affected by marijuana even after the high dissipates. In users who develop a dependency or addiction, quitting can cause sometimes withdrawal syndromes, anxiety, trouble sleeping, lack of appetite, mood swings, irritability, depression, experts say. So even though it might be helpful for some people to use medical marijuana, it would just make some other situations in health worse. And so that would, it would kind of outweigh the benefits.
That's done.
That's it.
On the, for the use of medical marijuana, you said that there was some side effects, right? And medical marijuana has been proven to be used by cancer patients, correct? Okay. When you say that there's side effects that go along with it, wouldn't it be okay to have those side effects in order to fight the bigger enemy, which would be cancer? Wouldn't you say that?
Well, I'm sure there are many more other ways that they
Then
can
like
use it.
nausea and stuff like that?
Well, you're kind of risking the same thing by using medical marijuana.
Alright. And can you elaborate on the taxation part? You said that it would go to companies. Companies like which ones? Like
They are.
what types of companies?
Not to reference. Okay, it says, according to the University of New England, it says, marijuana legalization will usher in America's new version of big tobacco. Already, private holding companies and financiers have raised millions of startup dollars to promote businesses that will sell marijuana and marijuana-related merchandise. So even though like your taxation is a good idea, there is an entire different aspect to the business, which is solely benefiting those who have private investments, which is not attainable to the public.
Isn't that how a market economy usually works anyway?
Yeah, but it would be a little more specific to the legalization of marijuana.
No more questions.
Can I press this?
All right. The first thing I want to address, the negative constructive argument, is that weed is more potent today, and that legalizing it would not be safe. It wouldn't be safe for students, and minors would have access to legal weed. Minors already have access to legal weed. You go to your drug dealer on the street, they're going to give you whatever they have. If they have 30% THC and you give it to a kid, they're not going to care. They're going to give it to a kid. By legalizing weed, you're going to know exactly what you get every time. So that's one of the many benefits that we'll have from legalizing weed. Also, you mentioned that there's a decline in violence where it's legal. We already through the war on drugs, we're already engaging in violence. FBI and police do no-knock raids, and people get injured. People get hurt. People are getting hurt right now because weed is illegal. We need to make it legal so that not only are we having reduced crime throughout America, we're going to have reduced violence through police and doing these no-knock raids and burning down pot farms, destroying private businesses. Minors you mentioned minors having access to weed through when it's legal. If you have to have your driver's license, it's has to say 21. They're not going to be able to get legal weed. It's going to be harder for them to get weed if it's legal. What else do I have? You also mentioned that we're fine since weed's been legal for a long time, and we're still fine. People smoke weed anyway. Why not legalize it? What else do I have? You also mentioned that it's ironic that we're have a war on drugs and yet we're legalizing it throughout the states. Why don't we eliminate that irony? Legalize it. We can use that money for other resources. We can put all that money that we spend for police officers and the equipment that they need to fight the war on drugs. We take that out, we put it into schools, we put it into addiction rehabilitation programs. We can make America better by legalizing weed. To go over my points, legalizing weed, where we will make it safer for those who choose to consume weed so they'll know exactly what they're getting. They're not getting overly potent weed. They're not going to get stuff that's laced with other stuff. It's going to be safer for students and minors because they're not going to have access it until they're 21 and they can legally purchase it. And people already do it. We need to make it legal for them. We need to bring revenue into the states. We've seen places such as Colorado, they have so much more money for schools, and it's awesome. Also, you failed to mention, if we keep marijuana legal, y'all haven't mentioned any about the racist properties. You're more likely to be arrested if you're a minority for smoking weed, even though statistically, white people use it more. So, it's true. And by keeping weed illegal, we're not allowing people we don't allow people to have access to the freedoms that they want and desire. If we legalize weed, people will have more freedoms to choose to do what they wish. Also, y'all haven't mentioned any of the medicinal benefits of marijuana, or y'all ignore the medicinal benefits of marijuana by keeping it illegal. And that's all I have.
That's done.
Used for that.
That's how you look at it for 2 minutes.
Yep.
You're like, oh.
Okay, so at the end you said you were talking about our irony and the war on drugs. You said we should just legalize it to get rid of that irony at all. So then if we legalize it, then why are we fighting other countries about their drugs? Why are we helping other countries with their drug problems and fighting them for their drug problems if we just make it legal here?
Well, then we're going to return the sale of drugs. So we're going to buy our own American weed because we have the climate that's better to grow it. That's why we grow tobacco, and that's why America's always growing tobacco because we have an awesome climate for it.
I'm not talking about buying it from ourselves. I'm saying we're fighting wars on to get rid of drugs. in other countries, things like that. So if we have it in the U.S., we're kind of like being hypocrites as the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, most of the drugs that are coming in through this country, those are drugs like cocaine, heroin, not pot. We're buying pot in the States.
Okay, but it's like a gateway drug. Okay, my
If
next
it's a
question,
gateway-
you were talking about like the age. How old, what would be like the age that you could buy weed at?
21.
21.
Same as alcohol.
Okay,
That's when the adult brain stops developing.
okay. So then minors would have a harder time with this, correct?
Yes,
With
minors
buying
would not have access to marijuana at all till the age of 21.
How do you correlate the violence and crime directly to smoking, like to buying marijuana?
Well, selling marijuana is currently illegal. You can't.
I'm not
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about the crime of like selling or buying marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about like just crime in general. So like murders and things like that. How like, cause they talked about how like that would correlate to.
Well, I was referencing y'all's argument. Y'all stated that drugs have the crime rate in areas where pot is legalized has gone down.
Okay. And then
That's time.
Thank you.
oh, I just stay up there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do I?
Amanda?
Oh, okay.
Wait, aren't you eight
It's
for
not
asking
eight.
the questions?
It's
so-
nine.
That's what I was
Yeah,
like.
nine.
Nine.
I was
Nine.
like, what?
Oh, I was confused. I was like, what?
So confusing video.
As Samarani stated in her attack, she said that the liberty that comes with marijuana can be impaired at the same time by smoking it because it affects the brain. But marijuana is not a product or a plant that affects the brain worse than alcohol. Alcohol and tobacco are perfectly legal and they affect the brain even more. And they are legal and we are free to buy it anytime we want, pretty much, as long as we are of age. Also, she mentioned the taxation would taxation for marijuana would not benefit the government as much as we said it would, but that's how the market economy works already. When you make a product, whether it's legal or illegal, not all the revenue is going to come from one part, and not all the revenue is going to go to one part. So that's how the free market economy works today anyway. If you manufacture alcohol, not all the revenue is going to go to one part of our country, or one side of our country, as far as like federal or state or different companies. Also, she mentioned that marijuana affects other parts of the brain, but it affects them in a positive way, to where whenever like you're feeling sick, as with terminal illnesses especially, it helps you to feel calm. It helps people with post-traumatic stress disorder, and it also helps has been proven to help people that have cancer. In one of our articles, it mentions that there's a survey that has been done to doctors that said that they would by a 43%, 43% of the doctors said that they would prescribe marijuana if it was legal to help many diseases. Also, we mentioned in our construct that the current legislation on marijuana is racist, because it affects minorities more than people who are Caucasian that smoke it, and she did not mention anything about that. To summarize, marijuana is consumed much like alcohol. They work the same way, and they don't affect the brain as much as alcohol and tobacco that are perfectly legal, but that can lead to crimes as far as like drunk driving and stuff like that. And that is all I have.
Still have 30 seconds if you have anything else.
Okay, sorry. So to recap, marijuana legalization would benefit more, the benefits outweigh the cost of marijuana legalization because of the many health benefits it has, how our free will is affected as far as being able to consume it. Taxation would help many different parts of the industry and also government. Thank you.
You got one perfect time. Okay.
I'm Amanda S.
So many things.
Can I?
Yeah,
Okay.
welcome to it.
So to start off with the racism thing that y'all keep bringing up, that yeah, it sucks. Racism sucks. It's always going to be there, whether or not it has to do with marijuana. Like, just taking out marijuana, violence, crime. Like, if you get pulled over and you're a minority, like, sucks. You're going to get arrested. I know those statistics suck, but it's going to be there. So to tie that in with y'all's liberty thing, it's your choice. Yes, it is. So if you decide to smoke and then you get pulled over or you get in trouble for marijuana or any sort of drug, then you put you put yourself in that situation. So just don't smoke because you're going to be targeted as a minority anyways. You should be aware of that as a minority. Next, taxation that we were talking about. Basically, it'll just make big tobacco companies, it's just a different type of, it'll make big tobacco companies, but for marijuana instead of tobacco. And as you guys see on TV, we're trying to shut those companies down because we're the generation that can overturn the big tobacco companies. So if we're trying to shut those down, then why are we going to make more for just marijuana instead of tobacco? The medical part is that we want to talk about would be the fact that minors, like, yes, adults have access to medical marijuana, but minors are like stealing that from their parents because marijuana is a huge thing in our generation. So to quote one of the articles from the New York Times is, on Colorado's northern plains, for example, a fourth grader showed up on the playground one day in April and sold some of his grandmother's medical marijuana to 3 classmates. The next day, one of those students returned the favor by bringing them a marijuana edible he had swiped from his own grandmother. So it's not just marijuana, it's not just like smoking it, but they're putting it into candy, they're putting it into foods, and they're being sold in places that have legalized it, like Colorado. And yes, people who have medical marijuana licenses can buy that, but their kids are getting a hold of it because they just are not, the person who has the license isn't protecting the medical marijuana well. The next thing I want to touch on would be the lack and lag in statistics regarding marijuana. We don't really know the benefits, really, just because it hasn't been a really big thing until our generation. So all we know is just like not the crime, but just like the bad things that it brings. But if we tracked it and did more things on, like research on it, we would need to find out more of the data than we could really know, because I mean that's why we're arguing to legalize it or not anyways. Another point that I would like to bring up would be crossfaded. Like, if you get crossfaded, if you're smoking and drinking, how are we going to determine that? Because if you're drinking and you get pulled over, we have a limit, it's 0.08. So how would you determine how high you are? How would you determine how drunk and high you are? So it just brings up other things. Can you only smoke? Can you smoke and drink? Can you do, like, where is this okay at? Like, you know how some people outside their businesses, they have no smoking signs. Would you be able to smoke your marijuana? Would you not be able to smoke marijuana? Like, what if somebody's allergic to it? What if another person is using it for medicinal use? It just really depends. So there would have to be a lot of thought and a lot of consideration for all those things, like I said, like taxation, medical, and then, like I said, how would you determine somebody being like crossfaded, things like that. And,
You got 20 seconds.
okay, I guess to just elaborate more, I don't. Another recap. I guess to put like about, I'm wasting my 20 seconds here.
Yeah, you're at time.
Okay. I'm trying to think. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, Curtis.
That was
I have next, right, Summary?
Yeah.
Okay, so you should vote affirmative. Going back to our first appointment, which was racism. My opponent stated that just because racism my opponent stated that that there's going to be racism regardless of whether they consume marijuana or not. But what we're saying is if we legalize marijuana, we won't have that problem at all. We can't control racism worldwide, but as far as whether who's going to jail over marijuana, that's something we can, because if it's legalized, we won't have that issue. Our current anti-marijuana legislation targets minorities disproportionately in the same way that Jim Crow laws do. Jim Crow laws did in the South prior to the Civil Rights Movement. What this is saying is that, yes, we have Caucasians that statistically smoke more than minorities, but they're not getting in trouble for it, the minorities are. Also, currently our U.S. government is missing out on an estimated $2.5 to $9 billion in tax revenue due to restrictions on marijuana. This benefit alone should be enough to make people realize that it needs to be legalized. Some of the benefits of this would be for our schools. Our children will have better school supplies, our roads will be better, all the things that taxes are used for. So instead of just letting it go under the rug and letting criminals reap the benefits of all that money from selling marijuana that they grow, we might as well get a piece of that as well. And then also, going back to medically, the doctors, a lot of doctors in the U.S. support marijuana use overwhelmingly. They see that it helps fight. They see what it does in the fight with cancer, and then some doctors even go as far as selling it illegally just because they know how much they've seen it help other people. And if I don't know about you guys, but as far as I'm concerned, the health of Americans should be one of our top priorities. And then we have liberty. I don't know about you guys, but I appreciate all my rights. I don't want someone telling me what I can and can't do. So liberty is defined as something like, so I should be able to do something as long as it's not infringing on someone else's liberty. Therefore, if I want to smoke marijuana, why is it your concern? If I want to smoke, I should be able to under my rights. Let's see. Oh. Here we go. Prohibition diverts billions from the needy. More than 50 government agencies feed at the drug war, trough. Food stamps and other social programs are being slashed while billions are spent trying to stop adults from using marijuana. Going back to what I was talking about legalizing it, if we do legalize it, that's less money we're spending for cops having to deal with it, having to pull people over. That's less money we're having to pay them. That's less people we're putting in prisons, which we pay for through our taxes. It's just more money in the long run that we can use to better our economy. Oh, also, going back to the taxes, billions of potential taxes go to drug cartels. Our cash-strapped states are being cheated out of billions that could be obtained by taxing and regulating marijuana like alcohol. We already know statistically that alcohol that is abused is worse. You have worse effects than using marijuana, so we might as well make them both legal and reap the benefits from it. 4 minutes. Prohibition denies our most basic human rights. It takes away our right of sovereignty over our own bodies and gives this power to government. Does any other human right make sense if we don't have sovereignty over our own bodies? After hearing the facts, I'm sure that... Okay. Yours is wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
Curtis, you made it.
That was stressful. I'm never going to be a bigger.
You look like it.
I should say that. I can
Producing big here.
just say the big city, yeah.
You'll smile at me because it's gonna make me less nervous.
Well, then I'm gonna be real serious.
Please smile.
Just look
Don't
at
smile
her.
at all. Don't
Yeah,
smile.
nobody smiles.
Just
Stare.
look at her.
I always smile at you when you speak.
I know.